Welcome back to the deep dive. We got some really compelling stuff from your articles, some research digging into this whole topic of workaholism.
Yeah, definitely some dense material.
Right. So our plan today is basically to unpack all this, get past just the surface definition. We want to look at, what drives it, how it shows up in sometimes surprising ways.
And those downsides, the serious ones that might not be obvious at first glance.
Exactly. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? That point where being really committed, really dedicated, tips over into something else, something maybe not so healthy. Let's see what these sources say.
Okay, so starting point. The sources pretty consistently define a workaholic as, well, someone who works compulsively. They have this inability to really limit their work.
Even when it starts causing problems.
Yeah, even when it negatively impacts relationships or their health. But what's quite interesting from a sort of official standpoint is that there isn't actually a generally accepted medical definition.
All right, it's not like you'll find it listed in the DSM or anything. But the sources do mention an older term, ergomania,
Ah, yes, ergomania.
which they describe as this excessive devotion to work, but specifically link as a symptom of a mental health issue.
And it connects it directly to things like stress, impulse control problems, even OCPD or OCD.
Obsessive-compulsive personality disorder and obsessive-compulsive disorder. Conditions known for those persistent thoughts, the repetitive behaviors. It really hints that for some people this runs quite deep psychologically.
Definitely. And the word we actually use day to day, workaholic, it's quite a clever mashup, isn't it? Work and alcoholic.
A portmanteau.
Exactly. The sources trace it apparently to Canada, 1947, the Toronto Daily Star.
And there was that pun, wasn't there? Referencing Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yes, Workaholics Anonymous.
Yeah.
Which immediately frames it, doesn't it? Suggests this drive, this need to work, can be as powerful and hard to manage as, well, a substance addiction.
That comparison really makes you think. It's clearly more than just someone who, gets a lot of satisfaction from their job.
Mm-hmm.
And the sources are careful here. They point out workaholic can sometimes be used positively, like describing someone super dedicated.
Sure, someone really devoted to their career.
But the main focus, the more negative meaning, and what these sources really zero in on, is that pattern. Excessive time on paid work, driven by some inner compulsion.
An urge they can't really control.
Right. And leading to neglecting, well, everything else. Life outside work. It's not just the hours. It's the why and the what gets sacrificed.
Which leads us to the next big question. What's actually fueling this? Why does it happen?
What did the research point to?
Well, the sources highlight a few potential underlying drivers. Things like anxiety, low self-esteem, even issues with intimacy or forming close relationships.
I can see how work could become a sort of refuge thing, a place to feel in control or get that sense of accomplishment maybe missing elsewhere.
Exactly. It can provide temporary relief, potentially creating this reinforcing loop. And another thing the sources mention is that workaholics often really struggle with delegating tasks.
Oh, that makes sense. If it's tied to needing control, or maybe perfectionism, letting go of tasks would be tough.
Very tough. And speaking of personality, the sources do link workaholism with traits like neuroticism, perfectionism, and interestingly, conscientiousness.
Which sound positive on the surface, right? Perfectionism, being conscientious.
It's in moderation. But taken to an extreme, you can easily see how they'd feed into that relentless work drive.
So it's complex.
It is. And there's this fascinating framework from a clinical psychologist, Brian E. Robinson. He looks at it on two axes: how readily someone starts work and how driven they are to finish it.
Okay, so different types.
Yeah, he identifies patterns. Like savoring workaholics, they might be slow to start, but once they get going, they get deeply absorbed and find it hard to stop. And then attention deficit workaholics, they jump into lots of things, high initiation, high drive to complete, but might also, paradoxically, struggle with procrastination.
That adds quite a bit of nuance, actually. It's not just one single thing.
Not at all.
And, we have to talk about the environment, too. Hustle culture.
Right.
The sources bring this up explicitly.
Oh, absolutely. That constant pressure.
Yeah, to always be on, always achieving, always productive. And the lines between work and life getting so blurred.
Yeah.
It definitely creates fertile ground for these compulsive tendencies to take root.
And not just take root, but sometimes even be, well, admired, framed as ambition.
Right. Like it's a badge of honor to be overworked.
Which brings us back to the dangers. The sources really don't mince words about the negative consequences.
So what are we talking about here?
Well, obviously, the strain on relationships, the decline in physical health we mentioned, but it can get much more severe. There's the tragic phenomenon in Japan, kachushi.
Death from overwork.
Literally, death directly caused by excessive work. It's a stark reminder of the ultimate cost. The sources mention the case of Prime Minister Kaizo Ibuchi.
His fatal stroke in 2000, yeah,
Yeah.
widely linked to the immense pressure and hours of his job.
A very public example.
And it's crucial to remember, this isn't just a Japanese thing, is it? The sources mention that Bank of America intern in London.
Yes, in 2013, died after reportedly working for 72 hours straight.
72 hours. It's just unthinkable.
Yeah.
But it shows this is a global problem. The potential consequences are truly life and death. It really challenges that idea that extreme dedication is always good.
Absolutely. And beyond those extreme health risks, there's another angle the sources bring up. Workaholics can actually end up being less effective.
How so? That seems counterintuitive.
Well, think about it. Difficulty with teamwork, that reluctance to delegate we talked about, maybe taking on too much, it can gum up the works organizationally.
Create bottlenecks.
Exactly. And then there's the simple impact of chronic sleep deprivation. Your brain just doesn't function optimally. Cognitive abilities decline. So sustain high performance. It's just not possible when you're constantly exhausted.
It's a kind of diminishing returns situation.
Yeah.
More hours don't automatically mean better or more output.
Precisely. And a key point the sources make is that businesses, HR departments, they often underestimate the risk workaholism poses.
They see the long hours, maybe, but not the potential damage.
Right. They might not see it as the potential threat to productivity, morale, and even the bottom line that it can become. It's not just a personal issue.
That's a really important perspective for companies.
Definitely. And just to round that out, the sources list quite a few related concepts, things like occupational burnout,
Which makes sense. Follows logically.
OCPD, which we touched on as a possible factor,
Yeah.
but also broader things like the Protestant work ethic historically,
Shaping attitudes towards work.
and then counter movements like the slow movement culture. It shows how our relationship with work sits within this complex web of individual psychology, but also cultural pressures and ideas.
Okay, so pulling all this together from the sources,
Hmm.
what's the big picture? Workaholism is clearly, well, way more than just working hard.
Much more. It's compulsive.
Driven potentially by deeper things like anxiety, self-worth issues,
Mhm.
and amplified by a culture that, frankly, often seems to glorify being constantly busy.
Mm-hmm.
And while dedication is great, these sources really hammer home the dangers to health, relationships, even how effective you are at work. And in the most extreme cases, like Cartucci, it's fatal.
Exactly. That's the core message, I think. A
Yep.
healthy commitment, fulfilling, productive. But these sources highlight how vital it is to see when that line gets crossed, when it becomes an obsession that damages other parts of life.
Finding a sustainable balance.
That's the key.
So something for you, the listener, to think about as you go about your day. Where are your boundaries with work? What does real productivity look like for you beyond just clocking hours? And maybe consider what messages, internal or external, are shaping how you approach work versus rest. Definitely some food for thought there. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.